Well, hello, church. We are now on our final chapter in the Gospel of John. We're in John chapter 21. Go ahead and read the chapter, and then we will come back and talk about it. All right, this is actually the third time since Jesus rose from the dead that he's going to appear, manifest himself to his disciples, and they are now up in Galilee. Remember, Galilee is to the north of Jerusalem. It's where Jesus, the most of his ministry was centered and where he is from. And it says that in verse 1, it says, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and he manifested himself in this way. They are fishing in remember, they're predominantly fishermen. They are fishing in the Sea of Galilee, called here the Sea of Tiberias. It's the same place. And they've been out fishing all night. So it's, it says in verse 2, Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee and the sons of Zebedee, who's John and James, and two other of his disciples were together. And Simon said, I'm going fishing. They said to him, we will come with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. So it's either late at night or early in the morning. They go out and they're fishing. They're casting their nets off the boat, and they're just catching nothing. So then the morning starts to come. The day breaks, and it says in verse 5, so Jesus said to them, children, you do not have any fish, do you? And they answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So they didn't know it was Jesus at this point. They just saw a man on the shore, and he said, go ahead and cast your nets on the right side of the boat. Now, what's interesting is that these guys are professional fishermen. They haven't caught anything all night. But, sometimes when you're fishing and you're desperate, things have been bad, you're willing to try anything. And so they throw their nets on the other side of the boat. They get such a large catch, they can't even pull the nets in. It is so full of fish. And John, what's interesting here, it's actually funny. It says in verse 7, therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, what's interesting about this phrase, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is actually used 5 times only in one book of the Bible. I'll let you guess which one it is. It is the book of John. So this is John writing, and he uses this phrase 5 times, that disciple whom Jesus loved. Who do you think that disciple is? Well, it's John, which is hilarious. And so John, writing the gospel, uses about himself, the disciple whom Jesus loved, which if I was writing one of the gospels, I think I'd probably describe myself that way too. And he says in verse 7, he said to Peter, it is the Lord. And this, I always got a kick out of this. It says, so when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he had stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. So back in biblical times, they would wear these loincloths, and when they're out sweating, working hard on the boat, they would take their other clothes off. But interesting here, if you remember like back when, you see someone at the beach or you see someone, especially that show Baywatch where they're going to rescue somebody, right? What do? They take all their clothes off before they jump in. Well, Peter has lost his mind. He puts his clothes on, dives into the water, and swims all the way to the shore. And it's great if you read this story because right about the time that Peter makes it about 100 yards from where the boat is to the shore, the boat is arriving at the same time. So Peter didn't actually save himself any time at all in this scenario. And they encounter Jesus and they have breakfast with him. They're talking to him. We're going to pick up the story in verse 15. We get this interesting exchange between Simon Peter and Jesus. So it says in verse 15, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, shepherd my sheep. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Now, this is a really interesting exchange, but it brings up a couple things that were going on in this situation. One is that it's interesting that Jesus calls him Simon, right? Now, Simon was his given name. It was the name that Peter was born with, but Jesus had given him a new name, the name Peter, which is based on the Greek Petros, which means rock. And it had to do with Peter's calling as one of the primary apostles for establishing the church, and that God had changed his name. But here he calls him Simon, and it's this exchange where he asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And 3 times Peter confirms his love to him. We have to understand this is just a few days removed from an experience that would have been standing out significantly in Peter's life, and it's where Jesus prophesied on the last night of his life, and at the Last Supper, Peter said, I'll never betray you, and Jesus said to him, Peter, before the night's over, you're gonna deny me 3 times, and then that night we all know, in accordance with Jesus and his various the various trials that he goes through, is that 3 different people come up to Peter and say, aren't you one of the disciples? And he says, no, I never knew him. And the last time he says, no, I never knew him, you hear the rooster crow in the background. And that was the signifying, it says that Peter went out and wept bitterly. So you have this situation where Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, even knowing him when he had said that he wasn't going to. And now there's this restorative process where now Jesus has died, was buried, has risen from the dead. But now there's still this problem that has been unresolved. They haven't talked about it yet, where Jesus knows that Peter denied him. Peter knows that Jesus denied him. And now here's Jesus' way of talking to him about it. And he asks him 3 times, do you love me? And Simon says every time, he says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And one of the things he's saying is, for every time you denied me, I want you to confess your love. And then he finishes it with this, tend my lambs, shepherd my sheep, tend my sheep. He gives him these 3 different charges, which really is what Peter's primary responsibility now coming out of this new season of Peter's life is going to be defined by his leadership in the church, his pastoring of God's people. And what Jesus is pointing to is for every time you denied me, I want you to remember, you're going to be tempted to deny me again in the future. You're going to be tempted to save your own skin. I want to remind you, Peter, that I love you, that I rose from the dead, and you can have confidence in me. And out of that love for me, I want you to tend my sheep. And then Peter's going to go on to do that. Well, we get another really interesting exchange that just on the heels of that, they continue talking. And Jesus says to him in verse 18, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go. Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he spoke these things, he said to him, follow me. He says, Peter, what you were trying to save during those trials is you were trying to deny me because you didn't want to be crucified with me. You didn't want to be hurt with me. But I want to let you know, Peter, you are going to lose your life for the sake of the gospel. You're going to go into, and many people believe that Peter went into modern day Iraq and he shared the gospel there, and many people got saved. In fact, we have St. Peter's out there in El Cajon, and it's part of them saying that the Chaldean church believes they were established by the evangelical work of Peter coming into Iraq and establishing the Iraqi church. He says, you're going to go and you're going to spread the gospel, but at the end of your life, Peter, the way that you're going to meet your ends is that you're going to die. In fact, the church tradition holds it. We don't have this in the Bible, but it's church tradition is that Peter was crucified upside down, considered a much more painful way because he didn't consider himself worthy to be crucified in the same way that Jesus was. And so Jesus tells him, you are going to lose this is going to cost you your life, Peter, the cause of the gospel, but I want you to trust me. And he just finishes with, follow me. Well, you can imagine, Peter understands what he's saying. You can imagine if you're Peter, this is disconcerting news. It's fearful news to find out that the way that you're going to die is you're going to be killed for the sake of the gospel. In verse 20, Peter says, turning around, he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, again, John. And he says, the one who leaned back on his bosom at the supper said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? So Peter sees him, he says to Jesus, Lord, what about him? What's going to happen to John? And Jesus said to him, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. This is such an important point that resonates with me, and it should resonate with you, is that our relationship with Jesus, what Jesus has called us to, the specifics of the calling of our lives and faithfulness of our lives, it really doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. We always want to make sure, well, am I getting a fair deal, or is this going to work out, or what about them? What about my brother? What about my sister? And Jesus says, that's not your business. Your business is faithfulness to me. So you focus on that. You focus on having faith in me. And then it says in verse 24, it says, John identifies himself. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And then in verse 25, we get this really interesting way that this verse that John closed out the whole book with. It says, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written." What an exciting thing to think about, all the things that we don't even know about that Jesus did when he was here, all the miracles, all the teachings, all the ministries. But the Gospel of John and the four Gospels specifically are the contained life and ministry of Jesus that God decided to reveal to us. And then it's enough for us to trust and have faith in him. But there's so much more. Jesus is so much bigger than even that. And someday we're going to be able to experience all of it, him in his full glory. I can't wait for it. John has been a glorious book. It's been my blessing and my honor to be able to go through it with you and even teach part of it. God bless you guys, and we'll talk to you soon.